It may be that I may go there for some time and try to help you in your organization. So this was the letter that Prabhupada had sent to Chidananda, and later on now Prabhupada actually gave him some practical suggestion that Chidananda had a job there in America, and so he'll have to have a job here in Australia so he can support himself. But Chidananda made a mistake. Instead of applying for like a worker's visa, he applied for a tourist visa. And when he applied for a tourist visa, just the way he answered the questions, the immigration official kind of thought there was something a bit fishy, and he denied the visa. So it wasn't to happen. It wasn't to happen. So later on, of course, Prabhupada received that news and was a little disappointed, but later on when Balimardan and I think Sudama, they were in Japan, and Balimardan had met in Tokyo an English couple that had come from Australia, and this is all recounted here in Korma's book. And then they said that the Australian people seemed to be very interested in yoga and spirituality and all that, and so Balimadan was interested to come to Australia, and he wrote Prabhupada, and Prabhupada again encouraged it, and that letter is also here. So he says here, Prabhupada was disappointed, and then later on, and then he encouraged Balimadan to come to Australia, and he contacted Chidananda and worked out how to apply for a visa and not make the same mistakes. So he was okay. So he was accepted. And he'd got an address of a couple that English couple that he met in Tokyo had met here in Sydney, and that couple helped him out. They put him up for a few days, and then he asked them, where is the kind of like all the happening area, the centre of Sydney, where should I go? And they said, you should go to King's Cross. So he went there, and he just kind of had a little money. He didn't have much, he just had some Back to Godhead magazines. And he had a little money, and he was able to just rent a real cheap room up in King's Cross somewhere, and he just started distributing the Back to Godhead magazines. But he wrote to Prabhupada that he had arrived, and he said that if some devotees could come here to help me, that would I would very much appreciate. And so I actually. There's that story of, and Balimadan had written to every president around the world, of each centre, asking if they could spare any devotee to come to Australia. And the story was that Upendra was formerly the TP in Seattle, but he'd wanted to. Formerly, he was travelling with Prabhupada as Prabhupada's servant, but he'd become the TP of Seattle. But he wanted to be Prabhupada's servant, so he wrote to Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, "All right, you can come, but as long as you find a replacement there for Seattle." So he did that, and he came, and a letter was redirected from Seattle to Upendra, where Balimadan was asking for some devotees to go to Australia. So, you know the story that how he was sitting in front of Prabhupada, reading the letter for Balimadan. Yes, he says here, Prabhupada, that he's asking for some devotees. So what devotees might be available, Prabhupada, to come to Australia? So Prabhupada was just looking at him. Looking at him. And then so Upendra looked back and said, "Oh, no, not me, Prabhupada. I'm just telling you what's in the letter." So then Prabhupada, there's a whole conversation here. Well, why not you? And so on. So in the end, he told that he should come and help Balimadan here in Sydney. And Prabhupada also wrote to Mukunda Maharaj, who happened to be in London. And he said he had heard about this assisted passage, back in those days, going back. And I know my parents also came on that assisted passage, and that's how we came to Sydney. We also came to Sydney, and for £10 you could get assisted passage to Australia by boat. You had to come by boat. So he said that Mukunda Maharaj, there's anyone from there, they can go very cheaply to Australia on this assisted passage, because Australia was looking for immigrant workers. And so he sent that, what was his name, that Vaikuntapad, or Tirthapad. I think his name was Tirthapad, one devotee from London. He sent him a little bit later on. But anyway, so just to set the background of how Prabhupada was always wanting to spread everywhere, and he really instilled that in his disciples. And these early disciples had that, very much that pioneering spirit. Bali Mahadan just came by himself, just with some Back to Godhead magazines, and just lived there. And he soon ran out of those Back to Godhead magazines. He found out that there was a branch of the Macmillan Company in North Sydney, I don't know if they're still here, but they had some Bhagavad Gitas. They had printed the abridged Bhagavad Gita, and they had some here in North Sydney. And so he found that out, and he went over and he bought some, with much money as he had, and then he began to sell the Bhagavad Gita. So in this way he was able to just subsist by selling Bhagavad Gitas. And Prabhupada actually told him that he should write and report to him regularly every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks what was going on in Sydney, and just him by himself here in Sydney. He said, you write to me every 2 weeks and report to me what the progress is. So he did that. So Upendra came across and a very nice recounted here in Pakorma's book how he landed, and he was there going through immigration and customs, and he kind of faintly heard outside the door there was a madanga. So there was Bali Mahadan just playing a madanga by himself, welcoming Upendra who came through. And by that time, Bali Mahadan he ran out of money, and so he couldn't afford the one-room rent. And so he heard from someone that there was a squat house available in Woolloomooloo. Woolloomooloo now is a upscale suburb around Sydney, but in those days there was all the squats, and I think Kalia, you lived down there for a while, and Woolloomooloo. Yeah, and I know when I was in King's Cross as the president in the 70s there, we used to go regularly to Woolloomooloo down to all the squats and do kirtan and distribute prasadam. So anyway, he went into that house, that squat house, and then he took. He said to he told Upendra, we don't have much money, so I've just got this house. And Upendra actually told me later on he was just so shocked, and he'd never seen cockroaches that big before in his life. Sydney's kind of famous for its cockroaches. I remember over there in King's Cross that we would be lying asleep at night, and we'd feel something on our toes, and it was cockroaches nibbling away on our toes. So these were the beginnings of Krishna consciousness in Australia. So they would go out, and they'd sold all the Back to Godheads, and gradually they sold all the Bhagavad Gitas as well. So they still wanted to. They would go out chanting at El Alamein, that park up there in King's Cross there, where the police station is, where that fountain is. That was the first place that Bali Mahadan would chant, in that park. And so they would just go there. They would also go downtown. Sometimes they would go out to out at Sydney University and do chanting and distribute. And they ran out, as I said, they ran out of Bhagavad Gitas and Back to Godhead. So they just printed. They got some paper and just printed on the paper a picture of Prabhupada and Radha and Krishna. And then they copied Prabhupada's. He wrote an essay on chanting, chant and be happy or something. So they just put that on one sheet, and they just stand there, selling those sheets of paper. And they used to ask for 2 bob, in the old days. All of us old timers, we know what 2 bob is. 2 shillings, right? It was 2 bob. 2 bob. And people would say, 2 bob for a piece of paper. 2 bob. 2 bob was a lot of money in those days. It's not like 20 cents now, but 2 bob, that was a lot of money. 2 bob for a sheet of paper. So, but somehow or other they were that's how they subsisted, and they sold those things and invited people back to their squat, and they at the end of the day, they found they actually made a lot of money from selling each sheet for 2 bob. And so at that point, that's when they could afford. They found the place at Potts Point. Up that going up the hill there. There's those stairways. I don't know if you've ever walked up there. I've done some Japa walks up there. It's quite a strenuous walk up those stairs, and so they found a little place there. So that was the first, really, I think, that apart from the squad and everything, that was the first centre for Krishna consciousness. I don't know if you went there in the bus when anyone. Probably you couldn't get there. Probably. You drove past, right? So they started there, and then then Upananda, I think he was travelling through. He was travelling through as like travelling the world, and he met the devotees, and gradually great Charu and Vaibhavi came gradually. So so it built up to about 6 devotees in that Pottsville centre, and so more and more were coming. Jagatarini, that's when she first met the devotees. She met Bali Madan at El Alamein, and she just finished a movie with Mick Jagger, that Ned Kelly movie. She made a movie with Mick Jagger called Ned Kelly. So Jagatarini Burjan's wife. She was an actress, and she met Bali Madan just at that park, and so she got one of those flyers, and she came along, and all others came along. So it became too small, and that's when they got that Bondi place. You went by the Bondi, Birrell Street Bondi, and so on and so forth. So gradually, and then regular reports were sent to Prabhupada, and so Prabhupada. There's an interesting thing that probably on the Wednesday morning class it will be told about how Radha Gopinath, how they came here to Australia. Very interesting story that when the devotees were in Bondi and Birrell Street, you probably read this in Korma's book, but it's just such a fantastic story. There was a Mr. Singh, an Indian man, who visited them in their Bondi centre. And so he was very impressed with the devotees. They were very enthusiastic, practicing Krishna consciousness very nicely. So he said, and at that time, they before in Potts Point, they just had a painting of Lord Chaitanya, and they had a picture of Prabhupada, and that was the altar. And when they went to Bondi, they had little Jagannath Baladev Subhadra. I'm just wondering if they're the same deities. These little Jagannath deities. Does anyone know whether they're the same deities that were in Bondi? And that's what they had in Bondi. So this Mr. Singh said, I must send you Radha and Krishna, Radha Krishna deity. I will send to this address. So he said like that, and he said, he was just visiting from India. And so he said, I will send Radha Krishna deity. So he went back, and he sent Radha and Krishna, who later became Radha and Gopinath. They came to Bondi. But by that time, the devotees, Bondi was becoming too small, and they'd moved to Paddington, and they didn't leave any forwarding address. So the deities had arrived there, and they were delivered there, but no one was there to receive their delivery. So eventually, they ended up going back to Mr. Singh in Bombay. Right? So they went back. So Mr. Singh was very disappointed. And he still wanted to. His heart was set on giving Radha and Krishna a murti. So he found out where Prabhupada and the devotees were staying at Akashganga. He found out where they were staying there, and at that time also Prabhupada was doing that Pandal program in across Maidan. And so he delivered those and gave them to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada very graciously accepted that, and he said, I will personally take these deities to Australia when I go there. So that had been arranged by Bali Madan, that he come to Australia. And so when they were doing the Cross Maidan program, they had the big Radha and Krishna, the Juhu deity there, Radha. Radha Rasbihari. They were there on the on an altar there on the stage, and little Radha Gopinath were on another table nearby them on the stage at Cross Maidan. And so that Pandal program went for some time, and then later on the deities went back to Akashaganga, and Radha Gopinath went back. So then the arrangement was made for Prabhupada to come to Australia. And so the deities, Bhagavan had been here in Sydney, and he'd gone to India, and he met up with Prabhupada, so then he came back. So Prabhupada said, you and your wife should go back to Sydney and help them there. And so he got on the same flight. So Bhagavan was carrying Radharani, and Bali Madan was carrying Krishna on the plane. They were wrapped up, and they carried them right on the plane. And so so Prabhupada arrived with the deities of Radha Gopinath on the plane into Sydney. So very wonderful story. And interesting, I was just reading that when some newspapers reporters were there at the airport, and one of the newspaper reporters interviewed Prabhupada and asked Prabhupada why he had come to Australia. He said that, and I remember that he said that I have come to your country to spread happiness and foster the Hare Krishna movement. And he said, I hope the leaders of your country will understand my visit. So, like a Krishna conscious ambassador of the world, he had these, things that statesmen would say, and Prabhupada was like that, he had, and just had very, far-reaching statements. I've come here to spread happiness and foster the Hare Krishna movement. I hope your leaders will understand my visit. So, yeah. So each time he came, we saw that when Prabhupada came like that, and sometimes they would ask very kind of mundane questions, where do you get your money, all this type of thing. And how much, I remember later on in Melbourne, some journalist asked someone, how much do you make every month? And Prabhupada didn't shy away. He said, we are making at least 800,000 a month, all over the world. And each month we are spending $80,000 on these books. And actually we could spend the whole money of the world on Krishna consciousness. So, the reporter is always wanting to get the angle, the confrontational. But Prabhupada was so bold, he wasn't intimidated, and I saw that time and again when he came and was asked very, kind of penetrating questions by reporters, So anyway, that's a little bit of the background of how Prabhupada came in. Of course, he came, and then the temple was in Paddington. And I don't know, you said you came up with Dwapayana. Were you here when Prabhupada came that time?
No.
It was just before my time. Yeah.
No. I explained the story. I came up for Janmashtami, the first Janmashtami in 1971 after the deeds had been installed. Me and Jaidama drove up here.
Oh, that was a few months later. Yeah, okay. So anyway, we did a wonderful account of how Prabhupada came here. It was a wonderful visit, and how the deities were installed here in the Paddington Temple. So Radha Gopinath, very beautiful deities, and Prabhupada, and they've moved around. Except that one time where they went out to Colo River. Remember, we had moved out of Buckingham Street, and then they were out at Colo River for 2 or 3 years, and we saw that over at King's Cross the other night. There was that film on how they were bought King's Cross, the property, and then renovated it, and then brought Radha Gopinath back from Colo River to downtown Sydney. But apart from that period, Radha Gopinath has not gone very far away from the inner Sydney area. They've always been in the King's Cross, Paddington, Bondi, Glebe, Potts Point. One time I remember we were over in the Spiritual Sky Factory at one time, Surrey Hills, over in Alexandria, but always kind of in the inner city. So they're very much inner city deities. That's the way I see it. Inner city deities, a wonderful deity, so they're inspiring us. And Prabhupada, and of course there's that famous saying that, where was that prayer? Have you got that prayer that he went after the installation where he said, I'm leaving you in the hands of the mlechas? Have you got that? Maybe I can find it here. No, anyway, he said that after he installed the deities, he said, I'm leaving you here, and he prayed to Radha Gopinath, please give them your mercy and give them the guidance to worship you nicely. And so Srila Prabhupada, of course, he came the first time was 71, and then he came again in 72. I think at that time we were in Glebe. And then in 73 also Glebe, wasn't it? Yeah, also Glebe. And then in 74, then I think he came to Melbourne also. Yeah, Melbourne in 72, wasn't it? 72 and 73 and 74. And the last couple of times he just came to Melbourne. He didn't come to Sydney. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit of an introduction to Srila Prabhupada's mercy. And so anyone who wants to speak, Bhavananda Prabhu is here. He can maybe talk on Prabhupada's mercy, or anyone else. Bhavananda, do you want to come and? Sorry? No, that's not the one I'm thinking of. Thank you.
Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavari Paskatade Satarine. Thank you, Maharaj. It was very nice. Personal. Of course, I was not in Australia at any time when Prabhupada was here. My only memory of Australia was when I saw in Prabhupada's room in Calcutta, he had in the corner of the room, there were these big Gaurnitai bell metal deities that had been made, I think, in Navadip, all wrapped up. And they were destined for Australia. Melbourne. What year would that be?
75. Yeah.
75, that late, really. I remember those. Oh, wow. They were quite spectacular. Even wrapped. So I can't speak really about Prabhupada or any of his Leela pastimes, preaching Leela pastimes in Australia, but I'll try to speak a little bit about something which Maharaj here mentioned, that Prabhupada was not afraid to take on the big questions. And those questions were, did they land on the moon? I remember in Boston in 1969, Prabhupada came from London to Boston, and he was with his servant at that time, whose name was Purushottam. And Saswarup said I should be Prabhupada's servant because Purushottam was leaving. So we were in Prabhupada's room. We rented a big house, some distance outside of Boston. And Brahmananda and I were sitting in Prabhupada's room with Prabhupada, and Purushottam was packing his bag. And Prabhupada said, he is leaving. We were surprised. What? He's leaving? Yes, Prabhupada said, he is leaving. I have said we have not landed on the moon, and he does not believe me. I'm sure Purushottam was not alone in that. You know, that Prabhupada was probably the only person on the planet who said, no, you didn't land on the moon. And to make it even more telling, when they televised this supposed landing on the moon, and they had the television in Prabhupada's room in Bury Place, was it? But he had his back to the television. He didn't actually watch it, but Purushottam was watching it. And he asked, where are the trees? Where are the rivers? Where are the... So the basis of Prabhupada's statement was that in the Vedas, in the Vedic scriptures, it says the moon planet is a heavenly planet, and it has demigods live there, and there are trees and rivers of Somaras. Remind me to tell you a funny story about Somaras and Prabhupada. And all kinds of activities, there's cows, you know. So Prabhupada said that the Vedas say that, so therefore they did not land on the moon. Of course, this was an ongoing discussion. Prabhupada said many things in months later, following months. But the most telling thing he said was, I can understand him, meaning Purushottam, doubting me. But how can he doubt the Vedas? So that is the basis of everything Prabhupada did and everything Prabhupada said. Everything was based on Scripture. They did not go to the moon. What other examples? Oh, so many. Some I won't mention now because it'll be controversial, but he said it. Yeah. I can understand him doubting me, but how can he doubt the Vedas? What a humble thing to say. Later, Prabhupada said, I'll take a little sidetrack here, that, using the bhajans of the great Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas, what is that, the cooling rays of the moon? Nitai pada kamalam koti chandra suhista. He said, it says the cooling rays. He was telling me in Mayapur. He said, so the moon must be covered with ice. Else how can it be so bright that it reflects, that you can read on a full moon? You can read a book outside in the light of the moon, and it's cooling. And the great acharyas say it is cooling. So it must be covered with ice, or it must be covered with diamonds. That it's reflecting in so much light. Then he also said at that time, he said, ice, he said, you know, on the moon planet, it's very cold. But they have rivers of somaros. He said, somaros is a heavenly intoxicant. He said, and they drink the somaros in order to become warm. He said, a heavenly intoxicant. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, and no hangover. And no hangover. So everything was based upon the Vedic scriptures or the representatives of the Vedic scriptures, the great Gaudiya Vaishnav Acharyas, who even in their poetry one can gain great inspiration and affirm one's faith. He never deviated from that course, no matter what public opinion said, no matter what the woke brigade may say, or the unwoke brigade may say. Prabhupada never deviated from the previous acharyas. So, in that mood, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, you should spread Krishna consciousness in the West. Prabhupada took that as a direct order coming through the acharyas, coming from Mahaprabhu himself. That's how we see things. When Prabhupada spoke, we accepted that he was speaking for Krishna. He had no self-interest. He had no self-interest. It was all the interest of Mahaprabhu, who said also, what is that? Because I can never remember. Prativiteya. Yeah. Take this and spread it all over the world, all you residents of Bharat. And Prabhupada did that on faith. Faith, faith, faith. Everything is faith. Not blind faith, but backed up by the highest philosophy. Prabhupada was able to discuss with the biggest so-called brains on the planet. He could hold his own. And he never wavered from the Vedic conclusion. Everything he said was based on the Vedas and based on an unwavering faith. Would that we had even a smidgen of that faith. The only, we're always looking for proof. So back in 1973, Prabhupada was having his massage at Mayapur out on the veranda outside his room. And he wearing his gamcha, and he would be massaged in a gamcha. He would sit, he wouldn't lay down, but all his massages were given, he was sitting. And a few of us were standing there or sitting there watching. And Prabhupada was getting his massage, and then he said, when I was a young man, I was very strong. And I ate halava every day. What does that mean, I ate halava? He had good digestion. I was very strong, and I ate halava every day. Then he held up his arm. He said, and now, flat tire. So we all laughed, like you all laughed. And he turned like this, and he gave us this look, mild. Would will someone please invent somewhere in the world a proper microphone stand? Is it?
True.
Does it exist anywhere in the world?
The microphone stand.
Huh?
It's true, everywhere's the same.
Everywhere's the same. Then he turned to us with a look of mild chastisement. He said, "Don't think this won't happen to you." Now I understand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 flat tires. My whole being is flat. But he was teaching. But we
Oh, that's good.
intelligence. Intelligence. Prabhupada also, this you'll really like. In Prabhupada's room in Calcutta in 1973, I was sitting there with Achyutananda. It was just Achyutananda night. And Prabhupada, Achyutananda must have mentioned something about a lawyer. Prabhupada said, lawyer. Lawyer means liar. He said, all lawyers, they're liars. He said, in the high courts of Calcutta, there is so much lying that the lies go up into the atmosphere. And when it becomes heavy enough, it comes back down as plagues. What to speak of now, all of the lies on social media by everyone in the world, flying around and around and around and around the world. Where's it going? Up into the atmosphere, comes back down, a pandemic. It makes sense. It's a science, the science of subtle elements. Anyway, everything Prabhupada did was based on faith, but the personal endeavor had to be there. In other words, he didn't say, oh, well, Lord Chaitanya said this, that it will be spread all over the world. I'll just sit back and let it happen. No, he went out and did. So the personal activity, the personal endeavor must be there. So the personal endeavor coupled with complete faith and humility, never taking credit for himself, always. Did you ever hear him take credit for himself? Never. Never. He always gave the credit to the Vedas, to Mahaprabhu, to his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Never took for himself. Never said, oh, I am a great pure devotee. Never. Though he did say, you want to hear this story? It's a funny story. He did tell me once that he was pure. When we flew from Nairobi to Bombay in 1971, and we were going through immigration, and Shyamasundar had forgotten Prabhupada's yellow fever certificate that he had received his vaccination before he left on the Jaladut. And they give you a card that says that you've been vaccinated for yellow fever. I had one because I got mine in New York. Shyamasundar had left Prabhupada's vaccination card in Nairobi. So they wouldn't let Prabhupada through immigration. He had to go into quarantine for, I think it was 10 days or 2 weeks. And just like today, you have to go into quarantine. They had a whole quarantine building out on the edge of the Bombay airport. Prabhupada remained very, calm. And I went with him. Even though I had my certificate, I went with him, along with his servant, Lotus Eyed. What was his name? Meant Lotus Eyes. Huh? Pushta Krishna, no. Padma. Anyway, I forget. He also blooped some time later. But anyway, it was a nice building, and it was 2 wings, and the wing where we stayed on the ground floor was like a typical Indian colonial building with a long veranda, quite wide, with all those nice lounge chairs all along, and rooms. There was a room with a window, and then a little hall where the bathroom is, and another room. So each room shared, 2 rooms shared the bathroom, then another 2, another 2, another 2. It was quite long. It was all screened in, and then there was a main hallway foyer, and then a kitchen, and then there was another foyer, but we were the only people in there. So that night I was sleeping. It was it was early. I'm sleeping and I hear Bhavanan, Bhavanan, this deep voice, Prabhupada's voice, very deep, like his intelligence. This is all in, Bhavanan. And I wake up and Prabhupada's at the window, Bhavanan. And I come out and I pay my obeisances. I said, yes, Prabhupada, what? He said, just now, I went to go outside to walk in the garden. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, by the way. And they stopped me. They wouldn't let me go out because the entrance door beyond it was all screened in. Because they were afraid. He said, do something. I said, well, Prabhupada, they wouldn't let you. They're afraid if you have malaria, the mosquito will bite you, and that mosquito will then fly away and bite someone else and give them malaria. Same as today. Same thing. No, do something. He said, this building is very nice, but I'm like a bird in a golden cage. They will not let me out. If I cannot go for my walk, I will lose my appetite. If I lose my appetite, I don't eat, I will die. Do something. I said, Prabhupada, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, what can I do? He said, no. He wasn't hearing it, he wasn't having any of it. He said, no. He said, ever since, even as a child, I could not tolerate being confined. Do something. I said, Prabhupada, there's simply nothing I can do. And Prabhupada looked, he said, yes, come, let us chant. It just passed. Oh, this is the kicker. He said, I cannot be infected. I am pure. And he said, come, let us chant. So then we walked back, and it was just like, complete, nice, just walking along, chanting japa, down and back and forth, back and forth. That was the only time I ever heard Prabhupada say he was pure. I am pure. I cannot be infected. Do something. Anyway, the main gist of my little talk, I'm sorry that I couldn't tell you anything about Australia and Prabhupada coming to Australia, but Maharaj really covered it, and I Kurma in his book, because he just took everything from Kurma's book. Intelligent, that's intelligence. But anyway, yes, everything is nice. Radha Gopinath looks beautiful. I like the drapes. And it's the white ceiling. You need another coat of white, though. But anyway, it makes a big difference. It lifts. Yeah. So, thank you. I have other stories, but... Well, talking about faith and the Vedas, the famous conversation which Prabhupada had with the reporter in Chicago about women and women's intelligence. And this woman, Prabhupada said, less intelligent, and this woman reporter, she was shocked. Anyone would be shocked. But Prabhupada, because it's in the Vedas, he would not back down, and he explained so nicely, actually, how they were less intelligent. This does not mean women devotees. Prabhupada said, our women devotees are all intelligent. And it was in a class in Mayapur. He said, what was Prajumna's wife's name? Aniruddha? No, Arundhati. Arundhati, Jamuna, Palika. He said, they are all very intelligent. He said, they can swim and they can drive. I cannot do those things. He said, so they are very intelligent. But in general, he would not back down from a fight, even though it may not, but he was able to argue the point in such a pure way that he could convince everyone of why he was saying these things. So never doubt the Vedas. And our duty is to become conversant in the Vedas, and we have been gifted with the Bhaktivedanta purports so we can understand it. Simple. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Radha Gopinath ki jai. Now let someone else deal with this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you so much with so much of nectar, sharing so much of nectar from Srila Prabhupada's pastimes. I'll now like to call Dvaipayana Prabhu to share his memories of the Australian Yatra or other pastimes with Srila Prabhupada.
That's old age. Catches up with everyone. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So, I was initiated by Prabhupada in Sydney in 1972. But I'm a very insignificant devotee. I didn't have any big positions. I was good at cooking and doing deity worship and chanting. But a lot of mention has been made about Upendra, how he came here and did the early preaching in Australia. And I was also infected by Upendra because Upendra was a very good cook, amazing cook. And he learnt from Prabhupada. You know, just like Bhavananda was saying, all the early devotees were so inspired by Prabhupada, they were empowered by Prabhupada and spread Krishna consciousness all over the world in a few years. So the cooking also, Prabhupada had a certain style of cooking, and he taught the early devotees and started the Sunday Love Feast right in the first temple in New York. So I was very fortunate, actually. My story is that me and my friend Johnny, who became Jaidama, we met Upendra in the streets of Melbourne, and Jaidama brought a back to Godhead off him. He invited us to come to the feast, which was renting one room in Melbourne in Toorak, and so we went there. So in those days, just like the fad now is veganism, in those days the fad was macrobiotics. Brown rice is a perfect balanced food, and you've got to balance your yin and yang and everything, you know. So me and my group of friends, including Johnny, were right into macrobiotics. So we went along to the Sunday feast in this one room. We sat down, they lit incense, they had a beautiful, clean altar, smell of incense, and beautiful pictures and flowers. And then they chanted, amazing chanting, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Popular tune in there.
That was probably the first tune we heard. So then Upendra gave a talk, and the way Upendra talked about Prabhupada, you know, he loved Prabhupada so much that when he spoke about Prabhupada, he was just transfixing, you know. And then he brought around the spiritual food. And although we were into macrobiotics, we felt these are saintly people, and we're just going to take this food. We didn't say, oh, has this got white sugar in, or potatoes, or eggplants, or, you know, all these are macrobiotic no-nos. But we just ate it, and it did have all those things in it. All of them. White rice, and beautiful sabji, sweet rice, halva, you know, simply wonderfuls. And so Upendra was just an amazing cook. And we were so impressed that we started offering our macrobiotic food by chanting this tune of Hare Krishna before we ate for half an hour. And we tried to make macrobiotic food prasadam, but very soon we gave up and we were infected by prasadam. So after at that time then they moved to another slightly bigger place in Carlton, and there wasn't enough room for me to move in, but I used to come every day and go out chanting with my guitar. You know, devotees were very encouraging to include other people in this whole expanding process of Harinam and everything. So when they moved into St Kilda, I joined, and but even before that I was helping Upendra cooking, so he taught me how to mix the spices and everything, and you know, so I learned the Hare Krishna style of cooking from Upendra. That's my point. That's the parampara of cooking. So after I joined in Melbourne, I was very soon sent up to Sydney, and I think I was swapped for Korma, who came down to Melbourne. For some reason he didn't get on with Jamil, and they had to separate to different states. But so Sydney Mohananda had just come. They had the temple in Glebe then. Mohananda, this fired up red-headed American devotee, young, was so fired up that he really got the place happening, got a double-decker bus. There was about 20 or 25 brahmacharis and brahmacharis who went out chanting on the street every day. We'd come back for lunch, go out again, come back in the afternoon, late afternoon, and have the brahmachari offering, you know. Because, you know, we were hooked on prasadam. And so Prabhupada came there in 1972, and that's the first time I saw Prabhupada. And for some reason, the first few times Prabhupada came to Australia, there's always some kind of uncertainty about exactly when he was going to arrive. And so we didn't get a chance to go out to the airport to meet him. Suddenly he was here in a car at the front of the temple in Glebe, and there he opened the door and he stepped out. And first thing, I think many devotees have said this, you know, because the way people talked about Prabhupada, he seemed to be like a giant, you know, but actually his body was very diminutive, you know, but he had this aura about him. He was like a, you know, a three-dimensional direction from a higher dimension. And he had this amazing aura, and we immediately fell down flat and paid our obeisances. And you know, there was a big yaga in the backyard of the Glebe temple, and many devotees got initiated, including my humble self. And another story I'd like to tell, because I just recently got some more information about it, the famous apple crumble story. So in 1975, Prabhupada came to Melbourne Temple. They actually bought this temple, brought the deities from St Kilda, the Radha Krishna deities, the big Jagannath deities, which I helped carve in 1972 for the first Rath Yatra. And as Bhavananda said, the big Gaunitai brass deities, the biggest deities that had ever been made at that stage in Navadvip. They were, Madhavisa had ordered them, and they were sent to Australia. Prabhupada was coming to Melbourne to install Gaunitai in the new temple, and he called it the Mahaprabhu Temple. So, very gorgeous installation ceremony. As usual, the ceremony was going on. I was slaving away in the kitchen. And some devotee came and said, "Prabhupada wants to see you, Prabhupada wants to see you." And there I am, working in the kitchen, you know, smelling like a, you know, chaunce. Deep frying everything in ghee, you know. And but, you know, I didn't have time to get changed and get clean clothes on to go into the deity room. Of course, the standard of cooking in the kitchen is you clean. So I went into the deity room. Korma was there, and Prabhupada was sitting next to Gaunitai's feet, and he said, he called me because he knew he had to be the first pujari for Gaunitai. And he said, "This is how you put the tulsi leaves on Gaunitai's feet." And he actually put the tulsi leaves between the feet of Gaura and Nitai. Not long ago I saw a video of one of the twin pujaris in Mayapur. He referred to that, and maybe it's because Gaunitai was a covered incarnation. He didn't want the tulsi leaves actually on his feet. But anyway, that's what Prabhupada instructed us, how to put the tulsi leaves in Melbourne. And also instructed we should have a feast every night for 2 weeks because of the installation. And I'm not sure if we managed to keep doing it for 2 weeks, but we did do it. Prabhupada was there for nearly a week, so every night I'd be cooking the feast, and we'd serve it out after Prabhupada gave the lecture, Gaunitai, after Gaura Arti, Prabhupada lecture, and then we'd have the feast. Prabhupada would go up into his room. We had this special room for him in the Melbourne Temple, and in that year his servant was Shrutakirti. So Srila Kirti, after Prabhupada went up into his room, he would come down in the kitchen and get a sample of everything and take it up to Prabhupada. So one night I cooked this apple crumble. Apples and oats and brown sugar and butter, a lot of butter and sugar and everything, and baked in the oven. And there was some kind of controversy, I don't know where it started, about whether oats were an offerable food or whether they were only fit for horses. But I would often make this apple crumble, and it was very, very nice. So this particular night for the feast I made this apple crumble. So Srila Kirti came down in the kitchen, he got a sample of everything and took it up into Prabhupada's room. And a few minutes later he came back and said, "Oh, I forgot to put the apple crumble on this plate," and Prabhupada asked me, "Where's the apple crumbly stuff?" How did Prabhupada know? So just recently I came up on Facebook, some other devotee in LA Temple, like me, he was a cook, he couldn't go to the airport to meet Prabhupada when he arrived with all the other devotees. And so when Prabhupada arrived at the temple, he was able to go in and have darshan of the deities with Prabhupada. LA Temple had a lot of devotees there. It was very packed, So this particular devotee, I can't remember his name, but he became squashed right next to Prabhupada as Prabhupada took darshan of Rukmini Dorkadesh, and he stood up and Prabhupada was looking at the deities, and this devotee could hear Prabhupada talking to the deities. He said, "I see you're dressed very nicely. Are they looking after you well?" He said, "And how's the prasadam?" Like this, Prabhupada was actually having a conversation with the deities, and Prabhupada, this devotee of course didn't hear Krishna replying, but he did hear Prabhupada having a conversation with the deities. So somehow or other, Krishna, Radhaballabha must have liked my apple crumble and told Prabhupada not to miss out on it.
That was because of the controversy, right? So that settled that matter.
That settled the controversy about the oats. Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for that famous apple crumble story. Well, now I would like to invite Her Grace Surabhi Mataji to come and share some pastimes with Srila Prabhupada.
I also wasn't here in the early days. I actually joined Krishna consciousness when I was traveling overseas. But before I actually went overseas, I was working in Sydney for 6 months, and the devotees used to go, I think it was in King's Cross, maybe a little bit further down, and they'd chant. In those days, the police were pretty bad. When the devotees would chant, they would take them away and put them in a paddy wagon and drive them away to the police station. Anyway, my friends, I was living in Paddington, and I had some friends staying with me, and they were there when the police came, when the devotees were chanting, and they put them in the paddy wagon and they yelled out of the out of there, please can you go to our temple in Bondi and tell our temple president that the police has taken us away. And so they went there and they told the temple president, and he could go and get the devotees out. And he said, thank you very much. Please will you come to our temple on Sunday for the Sunday feast? And so I had a friend, his name was Andy James, and he was in a group called The Asylum. And he played, you know, in a band, and I happened to be there one time, and I met him. And he told me that he liked the Hare Krishnas because he was a lead, what do they call it? The lead, not the lead singer, the actor. He was a lead actor in the play called Hair. And that's how he found out about the Hare Krishna mantra and the Hare Krishnas. And he said to me, oh, they're really good people. And so I said to my friends, oh, the Hare Krishnas, oh yeah, they're really good people. Anyway, came Sunday, I was the only one working in the house, in the little one-bedroom unit we had with 6 people. And I was the only one working, so I paid the rent. And so come Sunday, I said to them, are we going to go to the feast? And they said, oh, we can't go, we've got no money for the bus fare. I said, don't worry, I'll get a taxi. We'll go to the feast. I always like to eat. And so probably would have been one of the best meals that we had, because it was pretty hard when I was the only person working and providing the meals as well. Anyway, so we went to the temple and sat there, and the chanting, I liked that. And then they had a class. But I will tell you one thing. See, my mother, she said to me, you have to be very careful. She said there's these religious groups that say they have a man and they say that he's God. And so when I went into the temple, there's Krishna and with the cow, Govinda, you remember that, in Bondi? And there was a picture of Prabhupada. I went, oh my God, this must be one of these religions where they say that this man is God. So that was my first feeling about seeing the picture of Prabhupada. Anyway, my friends, after we had the kirtan, then they served the feast, and my friends, they sat with some devotees and they talked to them. Me, I was interested in the food. And I remember, I didn't find out till some years later what the gulab was, but I had the sweet rice, and I remembered, oh yeah, my mum, she makes some, you know, sweet rice, milk rice, and this brown fruit, I thought it was, soaked in the sugar water. Years later when I joined, I found out it was a gulab. Anyway, so when we were leaving there, my friend said, oh, you know, their philosophy is really far out. And I said, oh, I didn't understand really anything. And so Prabhupada always taught us, unless one's materially exhausted, one cannot surrender to Krishna. And it was, funnily enough, those 2 people who understood the philosophy, they never became devotees, and I did. So, and I was very attracted to the devotees because my friend told me these Hare Krishnas are good people. And so later on, I went overseas, and everywhere I'd go, when we got to London, all of a sudden we'd see the devotees running down the Portobello Road. Right down the end, I go to my sister, there's those Hare Krishnas, they're good people. And so later on, when I did become materially exhausted and dabbled in this and that and found out that it wasn't worth doing and you better stop it or it might kill you or it might destroy your brain, because you used to be able to remember things very well. and now you can't. So all these things. And then we met some boys in the band, and they asked us what song we'd like them to sing. And at that time, George Harrison's song came out, My Sweet Lord. And we said, My Sweet Lord. And every time we go there, probably 5 times a week, they'd sing that song for us. So we understand that all these things that are happening as we're going along is bringing us to Krishna. And finally I met the devotees in Amsterdam in the microbiotic meditation center. And then I was ready. And after 2 weeks of going there, I joined. The devotee said, used to tell me when I'd go to the temple after work, and they'd always tell me about Mangalati. And one thing was really wonderful, and that happened when I came back to Australia too. The devotees, they just talk non-stop about Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada this, Prabhupada that. And Dhananjaya had taught them. Dhananjaya had taught them all about Prabhupada because he'd met Prabhupada. And he told them so many things, and about George Harrison and everything. So just by hearing the stories about Prabhupada, by the time we all went to see him, we all loved him. We loved Prabhupada just by hearing those stories, those beautiful stories about him. And there was 6 of us, and we went to London, and we all got initiated by Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was kind, so kind. I always, my whole time with Srila Prabhupada, I never felt like, even though the men would say, the women. But I never felt that, because Srila Prabhupada, he loved us all equally. And I felt that. And when Prabhupada initiated me, he said, your name is Sarabi Devidasi, the name of the transcendental cows, the giver of abundance of milk. And he could see that I was very shy. I was in a room smaller than this, not as wide as this. And there was about 50 people in there. And so I came from a family of 6 children, but I never was really, around too many people. So Prabhupada said to me, don't be afraid. He said, if you follow this process, you'll go back home, back to Godhead at the end of your life. And I just, my whole time that I knew Srila Prabhupada, I always felt like that. I always felt that he really loved us and that he always cared for us. And he used to say to the temple president in Vrindavan, he'd go, are you giving the devotees hot milk every night? He said, not buffalo milk, cow's milk. And he'd look, when he was in Mayapur one time, the devotees were sitting there, and he said to the young girl, are you cold? Because she didn't have a wrap on. And he turned around to the temple. She said no, but he turned around to the temple president and he said, you must make sure that the devotees have everything they need. And Bhavananda's gone. But when we were in Mayapur in 1975, he made Bhavananda sit on his chair over near where the Madhujis were staying, which was above the big kitchen. He would sit on his chair outside near the gate, and all the devotees could line up and they could ask for whatever they needed, whether it was soap or toothpaste or whatever. And Prabhupada wanted that. He wanted the devotees to be taken care of, and he never wanted us to feel uncomfortable or hungry or without the best. The Prashadam had to be very nice. He'd ask these things. What are you cooking for the devotees? He'd make sure it was nice, isn't it? So when I came to Australia in 1977, the devotees equally, they used to talk about Prabhupada, but I didn't know all the devotees from before, but the devotees used to talk about them, talk about Charuan by Barbie. And when I met her, I didn't meet her till about 6 years ago. I knew all about her. you know, and I was telling, oh yeah, this, that and that. So it was the same with everyone here, even though I didn't join in Australia. I was travelling overseas when I joined. And, but, you know, I know all the devotees here from what everyone told me about them. You know, so I wasn't here to see Srila Prabhupada in Australia, but I got to see him many times, actually, like 6 times, but on those 6 times, each time was like for 6 days or 10 days. In Mayapur, we went 1975, and Prabhupada was there at the Mayapur festival, and we stayed there. And then we went on a train. Dwapayana was on that train, the Australian devotees. I'd never met the Australian devotees before until 1975. I remember Dwapayana and Atri travelling on the train, and Subbalakshmi. Yeah, a few of the devotees I can remember, American devotees too as well. And Prabhupada would be on the same train with us, but he'd be in the first class, and we'd be all travelling on the train with Prabhupada on it. And then we went to Hyderabad, and he opened the temple there. And he used to tell us things, you know, like, I remember in Mayapur, if the devotees got dysentery, he goes, then they should go and work in the fields. That'll help the dysentery. So I actually never got it. I never got it until we were travelling on the train, because we'd have to sit all day for many, many hours. You remember those trains back in 1975? They were so slow. And so, you know, it was so easy to get sick from just sitting. You weren't active. And so when we got to Hyderabad, we were doing Harinam. And the devotee said, come on, Sarabi, come on, Harinam. And I said, oh no, because I was one of the last ones to get the dysentery. And they said, do you remember what Prabhupada said? And so I went out on the Harinam, and I kept on thinking I wanted to go to the bathroom. And I'd go on the Harinam and do books, and all of it, you know, suddenly it just disappear. And actually, when I came back, I never had it anymore. So I kind of remember those things that Prabhupada taught us, you know. And, you know, often the devotees, they say, ask questions to me. I'll give them the answers, but I always say, do you read Prabhupada's books? And they go, oh, sometimes. And I said, you must read Prabhupada's books, because all the answers are in those books. All the answers. You know, and how many times do we read them, and we go, oh, that's the answer to that question I had, you know. And no one can explain it so nicely as Srila Prabhupada. We can preach, but what did Prabhupada say? He said, for those hours that you preach to those people, he said, if you give them one book and they read that book, that is more worth than you sitting there for hours and preaching. And sometimes devotees used to sit there for hours preaching to people. But a book is something they can take home, and it's something that they can always look back on. You know, you give them a little book, and from that little book will come, they'll read it and they'll go, oh, in that little book mentioned so many times about the Bhagavad Gita. And I had one young boy come to me when I was in Darwin. I did a lot of markets up there and distributed a lot of books. And one young boy, he came to me, and he was looking at some of the books. I said, why don't you take one of those? And he goes, why should I? I've almost died 7 times. And I said, well, I said, here's this little book. I said, this will show you beyond birth and death. And you'll understand, you've almost died 7 times. And I said, this will help you to understand what is after it. Anyway, it took quite some time of convincing. I said, look, it's only $2.50. You take it and read it. It'll change your life. And it took him a while to do it. I said, I'll give it to you for free, because I know you really need this book and you're going to get the answers. Finally, he gave me the $2.50. Anyway, 2 days later, I did another market. And who was there? after a while, after I set up my stall, that boy was right there, and he said to me, I want a copy of that Bhagavad Gita that's always talking about in that little book. And he went, you know. So that was amazing. And so this is the power of Srila Prabhupada's books. And Srila Prabhupada, he was so merciful that in the last 12 years of his life, that's what he did. He translated those books. There's not a person on this planet that could ever do what Srila Prabhupada's done. 60 volumes of books in 12 years. No one. No one in this world. That's why they in America, last year, they honored Srila Prabhupada as being the most prominent businessman, Indian businessman in the whole of America. Because he was able to write those books and the devotees distributed those books. How many that, like in so short of years, there was 10 million books. Was it 10 million or 100 million?
Last year?
Yeah, in the early years, even. Not that many. But, you know, millions of books went out. I think now there's something like hundreds of millions. And they said there's no businessman in the whole of America, Indian businessman, has been so successful as Srila Prabhupada. So they honored him. So that's our Srila Prabhupada. He was amazing. And we could talk for unlimited about the glories of our Srila Prabhupada, isn't it? Unlimited. We might be talking a little bit today, but actually there's so much more, and if we sit down together we'll talk more and more and more, but of course we only have limited time. But we were so fortunate, and just like in the beginning we'd never met Srila Prabhupada. It's really amazing. I don't know, I was saying that to one young boy on the bus yesterday, because he's come from India and became a devotee in Australia. But he'd actually visited Vrindavan because his family lives in Gurgaon, which is the next town before Delhi. And he had to come all the way to Australia to become a devotee. He said, oh yeah, you know, when I went to Vrindavan I just thought that this is, you know, like our family tradition. He said, I never took it seriously. But when I came to Australia, you know, I went through different things and, you know, got a bit disheartened. Then I became a devotee. So when I was in Amsterdam and I joined there was an American devotee, there was a devotee from New Zealand. The American devotee was Atmananda, and the New Zealand devotee was Akshayananda, and the French devotee was Kishori. Yeah, and where were the other ones? England, Abhumadev. I don't know if you met him. Yeah, and then there was a Dutch devotee. So there were 6 of me, Australia, and there was a Dutch devotee, and he was from his own country. But many times Krishna will send us to the other part of the world to become devotees, because I know if I tried to become a devotee in Australia, my family would be right there getting on my case, and I probably wouldn't have been able to join. But that situation and being away from home, beginning to see the world for what it was, and then becoming materially exhausted, and then asking those questions that brought me to wanting to find those answers. And that happened overseas. So, you know, no matter where we are, and if you get an opportunity, you meet a Prabhupada's disciple, try to find out as much as you can from their experiences. Because many of us have different experiences. Like Dorpiana had that nice experience with finding out that Prabhupada liked the apple crumble. And Korma found out from Srila Prabhupada because Prabhupada said, those puris that you make, you know, the puffed up puris, and Prabhupada said, the person who's made those puris, he is Krishna conscious. So, you know, there's many stories like that. Not all of them are in the books, but that doesn't mean that these stories are not true. many of us have personal instructions. That's what Prabhupada said to me at my initiation. No one knows. How many people were sitting so close by me and Srila Prabhupada that heard Srila Prabhupada say that to me? So there's many of us that have these little special stories, and so if you get the opportunity to meet Srila Prabhupada's disciples, I'm kind of sad that not some of the others came, because there's quite a few here in Sydney, and not all of them get to come to tell you their stories as well. So, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji, for these wonderful pastimes. Actually, when we hear these pastimes, it's like it should never end. They can go on and on. But being conscious of time, we will now do the Guru Puja for Srila Prabhupada. There are some offerings from congregation devotees that I'll be reading them out to Srila Prabhupada after Guru Puja silently while the Kirtan continues. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Oh, you're doing the audio. Lucy.
Okay, I'm leading it. He's doing it. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Sri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bandamue Savadana Mate Balamuri Savadana Mate Yahara Prasade Bhai Bhavatoriyaya Krishna Prapti Haya Ate Krishna Prapti Haya Ate Guru Mukha Padmavakya Chitate Kariyakya Arana Koriya Mane Asa Arana Koriya Mane Asa Sri Guru Charane Rate Ete Utama Gati Sri Guru Charane Rate Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa Chakudan Lilaye Janme Janme Prabhu Se Chakudan Lilaye Janme Janme Prabhu Se Divya Gyani De Prakasita Divya Gyani De Prakasita Prema Bhakti Ayate Abhija Vinasayate Prema Bhakti Ayate Abhija Vinasayate Mere Gaya Hara Charita Mere Gaya Hara Charita Sri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janaravando Sri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janaravando Lokanata Lokara Jivana Lokanata Lokara Jivana Aha Prabhu Koro Doya Deha More Parajaya Aha Prabhu Koro Doya Deha More Parajaya Asa Gosho Tribhuvana Srila Prabhupada Patita Bhavana Jaya Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada again. Namarum Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namarum Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschachare Sakarine Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare already the time. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hariba, 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 Nitai Gaura Hariba. Gaur Premanande, Srila Prabhupada ke. Jaya Vishnu Pad, Paramang Pradiviraja, Katari Astatara Sata Sishivar, Tamangre, Say, Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nandi Gaudi Vaishnavinda ki, Namachari Srila Haridas Thakur ki, Prem Sakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda Se Advaita Gadadhara Svasti Gaur Bhaktavinda ki, Sri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana ki, Vrindavan Dhama ki, Mayapur Dhama ki, Sri Radha Gopinath ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Devi ki, Shri Gaunitaya ki. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to Sri Guru Angaranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. So after that magnificent Guru Puja, now we'll appreciate there are a lot of devotees waiting outside to get the darshan of Srila Prabhupada and their Lordship Shri Radha Gopinath. So at this point, we'll just request the devotees in the temple hall to please make their way outside through the rear door, and we'll just open the temple doors for the devotees waiting outside. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna! Srila Prabhupada ki!
Hare Krishna. I humbly request, other than the Kirtan team and Srila Prabhupada disciples or 83 Union devotees, other than that, please everyone to vacate the room because there are about 100 people waiting outside for darshan. So please, come Darshan Prabhu, you can open the door. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Bring it from outside door. Use that door. Use same here. Okay, move the mats to one side.
Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Binda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. राधा गोपीनाथ श्री राधे जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा सुभद्रा माई जय सुदर्शना जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा सुभद्रा माई जय सुदर्शना जय गौरानिताई 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 जय गौरानिताई जय गौरानिताई 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 जय गौरानिताई जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौर हरि बोल जय जय शिव संधारती की संधारती जगदान करे भक्त बिंद की जय जय राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा दर्शन की जय गौरनिताय पंचतत्व की जगदीश श्रील प्रभुपाद की पतित पावन गुरु महाराज की निताय गौर ब्रह्मानंदे
नमस्ते नरसिंहाय प्रहलाद लाद दायिने हिरण्यकाशिपूर्वशः शीलाडङ्गानकालये ईतो नरसिंह परतो नरसिंह यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंह नरसिंह यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंह बाहि नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह नरसिंहमतिं शरणा प्रपद्ये बाहि नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह नरसिंहमतिं शरणा प्रपद्ये तव कर कमलवरे नखाम् अद्भुता शृंगा दालिता हिरण्यकशिपो अनुप्रिंगा केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय जगती हरे जय जगती हरे जय जगतीश हरे तव कर हिरण्यकशिपो अनुप्रेरणा केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय जगतीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे केशवद्रेता नरहरि रूपा जय नरहरि 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 जय नरहरि जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद विघ्न विनाश कृष्ण सिंधु भगवान की जय भक्त राशि प्रहलाद महाराज की जय।
Why is it so loud?
हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा।
इसको थोड़ा कम करना पड़ेगा शायद. I don't know which line is this, but इसको थोड़ा कम करना पड़ेगा. It's okay. 2 is fine. 2 is fine. We don't need another one. Wait. Where's Krishna Balaram? He went out. How come? Why did Krishna Balaram leave? अच्छा ठीक आराम. एक ताल पकड़ के रखना यार. गड़बड़ मत. श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय. समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय. निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि. राधा कृष्ण. ठीक है सर. राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर. राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर. जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर. राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर. जुगल किशोर. राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर. राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर. जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर. We'll sing Jugala Kishore, and then Antara will also sing. जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर
जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर जुगल किशोर राधा कृष्ण प्राण मोर जुगल किशोर 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 জীবনে মরণে গতি আর নাহি মোর জীবনে মরণে গতি আর নাহি মোর রাধা কৃষ্ণ প্রাণ মোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর কালিন্দির কুলে কেলি কদম্বের বান কালিন্দির কুলে কেলি কালিন্দির কুলে কেলি কদম্বের বান বান রতন বেদিরে উপর বসাব দুজন রতন বেদিরে উপর বসাব দুজন রাধা কৃষ্ণ প্রাণ মোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর গাথিয়া মালতীর মালা দেব দোহার গলে গাথিয়া মালতীর মালা ও গাথিয়া মালতীর মালা দেব দোহার গলে গাথিয়া মালতীর মালা দেব দোহার গলে অধরে তুলিয়া দিব কর্পূর তাম্বলে অধরে তুলিয়া দিব কর্পূর তাম্বলে রাধা কৃষ্ণ প্রাণ মোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর জীবনে মরণে গতি জীবনে মরণে গতি আরো নাহি মোর রাধা কৃষ্ণ প্রাণ মোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর যুগল কিশোর Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama राम हरे 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 राम 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 हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण ओ हरे राम हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण ओ हरे राम हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा ओ हरे राम 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 हरे कृष्णा my friend कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे तो पकड़ गए हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण ओ हरे राम हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे बोलो हरे Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Jaho, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी, मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी, मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी, गिरिधारी श्याम वनवा, राधा रमण गिरिधारी। हाँ, मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी, गिरिधारी श्याम वनवा, राधा रमण गिरिधारी। हाँ, मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी, गिरिधारी श्याम बनवारे, मेरो राधा रमण गिरिधारी। हो गिरिधारी श्याम बनवारी, गिरिधारी श्याम। हो गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी गिरधारी 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 ओ जय जय गिरधारी 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 मेरो राधा मेरो राधा मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी गिरधारी 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 मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी गिरधारी श्याम बनवा बोलो ओ गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी मेरो गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 रामा 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा अरे बोलो भैया रामा रामा है हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 रामा 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 रामा राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा हरे राम राम हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी. मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, हाँ मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी. मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी. एक भरोसा एक भरोसा गिरधारी. एक भरोसा गिरधारी, ओ गिरधारी, गिरधारी, जय जय गिरधारी, गिरधारी. हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे. हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण कृष्ण. ओ हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे. हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. हाँ मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी. रमण गिरधारी, हाँ मेरो राधा रमण गिरधारी, गिरधारी श्याम बनवारी. रमण. So from a very folkish UP, let's go to Bengal. We have another half an hour. The gift of Mahaprabhu in the mood of Krishna Prem on the bank of the Ganges is very different. There are different, very subtleties. So, Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
The description of Mahaprabhu is Hiliya Doliya Jai. If you know how beats work in India, the double beat that we call double, Kehrwa, actually does not really apply so much in Bengali folk. Bengali folk is Hiliya Doliya Jai. Mane, ding, cha, chik, taka, chik, da, ding, da, ka, ding, da. Don't go fast. Okay?
जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। आहा जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद।
Don't go fast.
Let the beat come to you. Don't go to the beat. Let the beat come to you. जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। श्री अद्वैत हरे गौर भक्त वृंद गौर भक्त वृंद गौर 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 भक्त वृंद हरे गौर 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 भक्त वृंद हरे निताय निताय गौर भक्त वृंद हरे निताय निताय गौर भक्त वृंद हरे सिडनी भक्त वृंद हरे गौर भक्त वृंद।
So once somebody asked me, what is the most traditional melody? We have many melodies, filmy melodies, folk melodies, mostly filmy melodies. So this melody I'm about to sing. It's a very good possibility Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself sung this melody. This is the oldest, most authentic Bengali folk melody that has existed. Goes like this.
हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo. Hare Gaur Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Gaur Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Gaur Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Nitai Bhakta Vrinda. I miss Mayapur when I sing these. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Ramo Ramo. अरे भाई रे, हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे राम हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Bolo Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Bolo Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. हरिहराय नमो कृष्ण जादवाय नमः जादवाय माधवाय केशवाय नमः हरिहराय नमो कृष्ण जादवाय नमः जादवाय माधवाय केशवाय नमः हरे गोपाल गोविंद राम श्री मधुसूदन गिरिधारी गोपीनाथ मदन मोहन गोपाल गोविंद राम श्री मधुसूदन गिरिधारी गोपीनाथ আরে শ্রী চৈতন্য নিত্যানন্দ শ্রী অদ্বৈত সীতা হরি গুরু বৈষ্ণব ভাগবত গীতা শ্রী চৈতন্য নিত্যানন্দ আরে শ্রী রূপ শ্রী সনাতন ভট্ট রঘুনাথ শ্রী জীব গোপাল ভট্ট দাস রঘুনাথ ভট্ট রঘুনাথ শ্রী জীব গোপাল ভট্ট দাস রঘুনাথ। তখন সখী বললেন, so before we go to Mayapur, before we go to Vrindavan, we always have to go through, that is our philosophy, to go through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Vaishnavas. And once we understand that mood, then we can enter the realm of Vrindavan, which is now this melody. We'll finish with this, a very standard, yes. Well, 5 or 10 people need to leave the temple for a little bit so that other people can come in and have darshan, maybe. So whoever wants to volunteer. So as I was saying, I'm going to finish with a very Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Shanti, mai bhaiya, Om Shanti. Acha. So let's go back to Vrindavan. We'll finish with a very standard, what we call UP wala thumka. This is, as I said, very traditional UP folk melody. We sung Bengali folk now. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. जाको राखे कन्हैया रे, मार सके न कोई, मार सके न कोई. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, oh Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama राम हरे हरे हे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण ओ कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण पायो जी मैंने पायो जी मैंने राम रतन धन पायो धन पायो राम रतन धन पायो पायो जी मैंने राम रतन धन पायो। वो धन कौन सा है? ओ हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। बोलो हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे Ram Hare Rama, Rama Rama Oh Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Two more minutes left. One more very traditional melody came to me. I'll sing it in the voice of Hari Om Sharan. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaho Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Oh Nitai Gaur Premanand Hari Hari Nitai Gaur Premanand Hari Hari Bol. Please Hari Bol together. Nitai Gaur Premanand Hari Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Premanand Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagwan ki jai. Samaved Bhaktavrinda ki jai. I would like to thank the Sydney Temple for inviting me, having me, and of course Shri Shri Radha Gopinath ji, all of you. Thank you so much for having me. Haribol. Hare Krishna. Special thanks to the drummers. I always say the singer has the easy job. So special acknowledgement for the both Harsh and our friend. What is your musician name? Okay, Krishna Balram. Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for the drummers who've made you dance. Come on. Girls, round of applause.
Hare Krishna everyone. Sorry, you have to see my face again. There are 35 devotees in the temple room. There are about 10 to 15 people waiting outside. So you had a very nice kirtan of Haridev Prabhu. I request at least 10 people to leave. Please, the mood of Vrindavan is giving opportunity to other ones. So if 10 people can leave, then the Kirtan can start. I need 10 people. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Hare Krishna. I need 3 more to leave, please. People are waiting outside. They've been waiting for half an hour. Please, it'll be really nice if you can give place for other people. 15 people have been waiting for half an hour outside. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Sri Radha Gopinath ki. So what do we sing? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Together, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.